Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of October. Today we have some dates, so let's start. And first we're going to discuss the north of LPR Republic, or the west-east part of Kharkiv region, the Oskol front line. But today I believe that we can call this front line like two rivers front line, because the main clashes, the main battles are between two rivers. This one river by the name of Zherebets, this river that moves from Seversky Donetsk river on the east side from Liman, between Liman and Kremenaya, this river that moves to the north, right to Kupiansk, and the Krasnaya River or Red River that moves from Kremenaya, Krasnoyarsk, Svatovo, Nizhny So the main clashes are between these two rivers. And if we're talking about the Ukrainians, it's not a very nice position for them, because as I see that it's very difficult for them. It's a very tough job for them to take control over this territory. If we analyze the data that we receive from the Russian Ministry of Defense, every day they give us a lot of numbers, and we received a lot of information from this front line. And if we analyze their data, we understand and we see that the main areas where the Russians have their fortification is on this line from Kotlyarivka to Orlyanka, this area, and the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts trying to crack these fortifications, but all their attempts were failed. They were defeated. And if we're talking, let's say, about today, about the previous 24 hours, the Russians reported that Ukrainians made another attempt to crack this area, but they were defeated. And the Ukrainian losses is around 50 soldiers and 14 armored vehicles. So this is the first Russian fortification. Now let's move to the south, and let's talk about this river Zhovanka. If we analyze the Russian sources, we see that the Ukrainians are trying to attack this river. There are few specific places where the Ukrainians are trying to do this. And mainly the Ukrainians are trying to attack this area where there is a road that connects, let's say, river Zhovanka and the road H26. If we're talking about Stelymakhovka, this town, according to the Russian sources and according to the Ministry of Defense report, this territory is still under Russian control. And they have their fortification. The Ukrainians every single day are trying to make some crossing Zherebets river operation, but all their attempts were failed. So the Ukrainians are trying to attack Stelymakhovka just with one purpose: to get access to this road that leads right exactly to road H26. Another place where the Ukrainians are trying to storm, another place where the Ukrainians made few attempts of taking control over this area is Raigorodok, this town. So let's update this territory as well as the Russian with the blue cloud, but that means that this territory is under Russian control. So as you can see, this is the second place where we can find the road that connects this river, Zhovanka river, Zherebets river, with road H26 or P66 that leads to Svatovo. This is the second place. Another place where the Ukrainians are, and they established control over this area, is Makeivka. This town is under Ukrainian control, and as you can see, this town also located on the river, and also there is a road that connects this river Zherebets with the P66 road, or with these roads that H26 or P66. But this town is under Ukrainian control. If we move to the south, these towns like Nevskaya, Novosadovo, and Terny, these three towns, is under Russian control. And this information, we got some confirmation about this during these weeks. So these towns is under the Russians. If we're talking about Yampolovka, this town is 100% under the Ukrainian control, or maybe in the gray zone. And there are some issues with town by the name of Tarskoye, this one, because a few days ago the Russians reported that they did some kind of counter-offensive operation in this area and take control over this town, but later we got updated that Ukrainians returned control. So for now, I believe that this town is in the gray zone. So now if we take a look at this map, we see that there are at least 4 places or 5 places that Ukrainians can use to attack the Russians. The first bridgehead is the bridgehead from Yampolovka, but these forces in Yampolovka are blocked by the Russians on the north from Terny in this area. So I believe that the Russians, they do have some fortification in this area, and it's the 20th Russian army, and they're suppressing and pinning down the Ukrainians in the south. If we're talking about attack in direction of Kreminaya, the Russians have already prepared very nice fortifications in this area. If you remember, they left Dibrova during the Liman defensive operation, but during the previous weeks they returned control over this town. So from this area, do the Ukrainians have possibilities to attack from this area? I believe they have, but I believe that they can do this just with light infantry and troops without support from armored vehicles and tanks and so on, because all this bridge, at least I know that this bridge is destroyed that connects Zarechno and Tarskoye. So I'm not sure that Ukrainians are able to use this bridgehead for attack, just for one reason, because they are not able to move a lot of infantry, a lot of armored vehicles in this direction. And as you can see, there is like a very big lakes in this area, and it's not very easy to cross these areas. There is some dams like this one, but I'm not sure about the quality of these dams, and the question is whether they're still there or maybe they were destroyed during the previous battle. So if we're talking about the south area, highly unlikely that the Ukrainians are able to use this bridgehead. Of course, they can use some tactic for pinning down the Russians in Kreminaya, not to allow them to move their reserves to the north. Now we are moving to the north, and we are near Makiivka, this one. And for now we can say that this is the only, this is a very nice bridgehead that the Ukrainians are able to use for their counter-offensive operation, because this town is located on the road, and from this town they're able to attack Plashanka, and from Plashanka to attack Krasnorechskaya. But if we're talking about Krasnorechskaya, there is one important difference and one important thing, that entire town is located on the let's say east side of this river, Red River. So that's why even if Ukrainians attack this town, they won't be able to take control over the buildings in this town, because first they need to cross this river. So that's why I believe that this direction of Ukrainian attack is also not very good. They can also use this attack just with one purpose, to cut P66 road and to cut the north part of Russian defense line with Svatova, with Kreminaya, Rubizhno, and so on. And of course, from this area, from Makiivka, the Ukrainians are able to attack the Russians in the south, in Nevskaya, Novosadova, in this area. But the thing is that the purposes of this attack, for now, I'm not sure if there is any purpose, because I believe that the Russians also have some defense line in this area. And of course, the Russians, I believe, did everything they need just to freeze and to pin down the Ukrainians in town by the name of Makiivka. Now let's move to the north. There are some towns like Novodyane, Karmazinovka, Kovalyovka. As you can see, there are no areas where the Ukrainians are able to cross, maybe just using the pontoon bridges, but it's an open field, and I believe it's not a very easy job to build pontoon bridges in this area. First, you need to bring some forces here, and we know that there is no railroad connections with this area. Yes, there is a there are railroads, but they are not functioning. The bridges were destroyed, so that's why if the Ukrainians want to build some pontoon bridges, they need to move some engineer forces and a lot of equipment, and they need to do this using the regular roads without railroad support. Because if we compare the same situation with Kherson district with this area, we know that there is a town by the name of Bereznygovate, this one, the main center, the main logistics center that Ukrainians are using for their operations. And if you see, there are a lot of railroads that are very close to this area. It's not a very big deal to move engineering forces, tanks, fuel, and so on. But if we're talking about this area, all these railroads are not working, so it's not an easy job to prepare offensive operation and to establish stable logistics in this area. Now we're moving to Raygorodka, this town. The Ukrainians made maybe dozens of attempts to attack this town, but all the attacks were failed. They were defeated. The Russians, I believe, have their fortifications in this area. They prepare themselves, and that's why the Ukrainians, but they need, because this is the shortest road. As you can see, there is town Barova and this area, so this is the shortest road, and the Ukrainians have some pontoon bridges in this area. Maybe some bridges are still functioning, so that's why the Ukrainians need to take this town, because at least they will have at least some logistic in this area, and from, of course, this Raigorodka they will be able to attack Svatovo in front. But Svatovo is the same problem, has the same problem for the Ukrainians as Krasnorechsk. Almost entire town is located on the east side of this river, so that's why the Ukrainians don't have a lot of opportunities and possibilities to take some positions and to keep these positions for a very long time. And Stelmakhovka, also the Ukrainians made a few attempts to attack this town, but for now all their attempts were failed. And this is the same reason there is a road that leads to this area, and of course with using the roads is the best chance, best opportunity to be very fast, to be successful, because without this the all entire operation will be failed. And now we are moving to the north, right to the neck, to the head between these two rivers. This is the one river, this is another river, and there is like space between these two rivers, and the Russians have their positions on this line. At least this is their first fortifications, and for now the Ukrainians couldn't get control over this area. But we'll see, we'll follow, because if we compare all the Ukrainians' tactics they might use, like to cross the river and so on, they need to do a lot. And another thing, they need to build pontoon bridges, and of course also the Ukrainians are able to use like tactic of attacking between these two rivers. This is also not very good tactic, because I understand that there is a town by the name Nizhny Duvonka from the Russian side. I believe that there are some artillery positions, and of course from this area the Russians will be, it's not a very big deal for the Russians to cover all the Ukrainians who will use this road to attack Svatovo. So the only one way how to attack Svatovo is to make a very big hook in direction of Troitska, but there are no roads at all in this area, and this operation might take a lot of time. The only thing that the Ukrainians are able to do is just to send commandos and scouts to this area. The mobile hook are able to take control, and then they need to wait some time before the Ukrainians will deploy the armored vehicles and so on this side, let's say, of these fields, because you can see these two areas are not even connected between each other, even with the local roads. So if we want to attack, to get from this Tirny to this Kashkarny, you need to make a very big hook. Maybe you can use fields, but I'm not sure about the quality of the ground. So the puzzle for the Ukrainians are very difficult. They understand that they need to do something, because if they don't do anything, then the Russians will start their counter-offensive operation, and the Russians are able to attack the Ukrainians from any point of Belgorod region, so they can attack in any direction from this area. So we'll see, and we'll follow this situation. Now let's move to the south, and let's talk about Bakhmut, because more and more updates are coming from this town. As you can see, the Western sources map has been updated a little bit. They have added small territories under Russian control. But if we are talking about the Russian sources, let's take a look at their map. Today they reported that they got control over Ivangorod. As you can see, there is a green line and a gray line. Green is like 100% under Russian control, and the gray line is the gray zone. But today we got report that the Russians got town of Ivangorod. Furthermore, yesterday we got report that there are some heavy clashes in these dams. So to tell the truth, I'm not even sure the real position of the Russians in this area. But I believe, and there were a lot of updates about this situation, that the Russians control something like this and these territories. So this is the territory that is really under real Russian control. So as you can see, situation is not critical, but not in Ukrainian favor, because now there is some very dangerous back, we can see. There is also river Bakhmut. The Russians don't have any stable position on the west side of this river, but anyway, today we got a lot of reports that there are very heavy clashes in Opotne, in this town, and if the Russians are able to take Opotne, and I believe that they're ready, because we got some conversation, some interview with Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, and if you remember, Wagner is one of the main forces who is storming Bakhmut these days, and he was saying that today there are very heavy clashes in this Opotne, and that the Russians are clearing this area. So I believe that very soon they will take control over this town, over this part of Bakhmut. And if they are able to do this, we understand that from that moment the Russians will be able to storm Bakhmut at least from three sides: from the south, from the east, and from the northeast side of town. But the thing is that this is still not enough for the Russians to take control over the Bakhmut, because if the Russians want to be successful, they need to do two things, and I believe that next weeks they will concentrate their forces, their attention on these areas. First of all, the Russians need to take control over Azaryanovka, over Kurdyumovka, over Andreevka, and over Klishchevka. So they need to take these areas anyway. And if the Russians are able to establish control over this territory, they will be able to achieve one important thing. They will be able to establish fire control over the road H32, this one, and they will cut every supply and support that moves from Chasov Yar, Konstantinovka in this town. Of course, the Ukrainians will be able to use this road, but anyway, their losses will be very high. But taking control over this road doesn't solve another important issue, that the Ukrainians still have possibility to support Bakhmut from the north using the road MO3, and there are still connections between Bakhmut and Seversk bridgehead. So that's why I believe that the Russians will concentrate their forces. And furthermore, there were some update that this town Podgorodny is already under Russian control, and that some part of this part of Bakhmut is also under Russian control. So I believe that the next weeks the Russians will try, or will concentrate their forces, their attempts to take control over Krasnogora, this town. Because if the Russians are able to take control over this small suburbs of Bakhmut, because these suburbs located on the Russian side of the river Bakhmut, so there is no natural barrier, so they need just forces, tanks and artillery, and so for support of air support, and they will be able to take control of this town. And if they do this, we understand that from that very moment the Russians will be able to establish fire control over the road MO3. And by taking Krasnogora, we understand that Solidar group and Seversk group will be cut off from Bakhmut, and from now on Bakhmut will be by itself. Of course, there are going to be some roads, some local roads, and the Ukrainians will use them, but anyway, the possibilities of supporting forces in Bakhmut will be very low. And so that's why I believe that this is the plans that the Russians will try to achieve during the next weeks, like to take Krasnogor in the north, because as we saw, the Russians were defeated, not like defeated, their attempts to take Solidar failed. They were trying to take this town, they took some Knauf plan, they were trying to push, but since that moment they couldn't take even a square meter. So I believe that for now they decided not to continue the movements in direction of Solidar, and I believe that they will try, but anyway they need somehow to do something in the north, trying to cut the north force Seversk from Bakhmut. So that's why I believe that they will try to take town Krasnogora, this one, and to cut this town from the south. And maybe after that they will be able to develop their progress in Solidar. For now, Solidar still have fresh blood from Bakhmut, from this area, and without cutting supply and support road of Solidar, it's highly unlikely to take this town by the Russians. So these the plans, and these the Russians, I believe, movements the next days that we're going to see. Now we are moving to Avdiivka bridgehead. Today we got also a lot of updates from this area, and the most important one is that the Russians got control or have almost cleared like Pervomaiska, and they got control over fortification and trenches between Nivolskaya and these fields. So I believe that the Russians will concentrate on taking Nivolskaya, and I believe that they're able to do this very soon, maybe the next week or something like this. And they need to complete the clearing of Pervomaiska and start developing their operation offensive in direction of Nitailova and Vodyane, because if the Russians are able to take Vodyane, Oputne, these fortifications, and Nitailova, then the Russians will be able to start their movement in direction of Orlovka through Toninka and Severne. So I believe that in the next weeks, maybe 2 or 3, the Russians will try to concentrate on these areas like Pervomaiska to complete clearing, Vodyane, Oputne, with one purpose: to establish like stable position, to push the Ukrainians from this area, to push their artillery back from this area, and then they will concentrate on attacking Orlovka. And from that moment, Avdiivka, we can say, will be starting with Avdiivka encirclement operation. And I will remind you one more time that during the previous days, the Russians were attacking Pavlograd heavily with the drones and rockets, trying to reduce the Ukrainians' possibilities of regrouping and so on. Now, if we're talking about Zaporozhye front line, there are no changes in this area at all. And another important update are coming from Kherson. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours of battles, clashes around Kherson, the Ukraine lost around 110 soldiers and 33 armored vehicles. The Ukrainians, as usually, were trying to attack this area all along the front line, trying to crack the Russians in this area, but it's like open fields. The Russians can see everything, and they just need to be very qualified, to have very qualified artillery forces to stop the Ukrainians. But we see that the front lines have been stabilized during the previous days. We see that there are no movements, and many of you, I believe, may think that the Ukrainians are no longer able to do anything in these regions or to achieve some success and so on. Today we got a very interesting report from Kherson district. The governor of this area made some video. I believe that may be some fake or false flag or some kind of media trap for the Ukrainians, but anyway, I think that you need to know this. The governor of this area asked for help. He asked Putin for help, and he was asking to help him, to help this region, to evacuate people. This is what he was asking for. So some Russian sources were saying they was like in panic, because if a governor of this area asking to help with evacuation from this area, some people were saying that maybe the Russians are planning to leave this bridgehead, because they understand that and they are not able to hold this position, because they also can see the number of Ukrainian forces on this bank of the river. So that's why maybe they're preparing, and they understand that it would be a very bad decision from their side to keep civilians in this area, because you know what the Ukrainians are doing with these civilians who supported and worked with the Russians. And a lot of people from this area have already got the Russian citizenship and so on. So for them, it's like suicide operation to stay in this town. It was like the first opinion. But the second one was that the Russians understand that it is very difficult if the Ukrainians are able to send like 40, 50, 60,000 soldiers and at the same time all along the front line of the Kherson district. They understand that they will be forced to step back, to make another fallback in this operation. So that's why they understand that they need to prepare Kherson and to make Kherson as a real fortification, because it's highly unlikely to encircle Kherson, because if you want to encircle, you need first to cross the rivers to get on this bank of the river. So that's why the Russians anyway are able to have and to save some supply roads to this area, and they will have possibility to move products, ammunition, shells, reinforcements to this town anyway. But it is not a very good idea to keep civilians in this area, because if the Ukrainians decide to storm Kherson, they will try to reduce this town to ruins anyway, because I'm not sure that there will be any mercy in this town. The Ukrainians, it's a vital question for the Ukrainians to move the Russians from this bank of the river to that bank of the river. So I believe that they will know they are not planning to count their losses. The only thing they need is to, if it's necessary to ruin it, they will ruin, but just to move the Russians on this bank of the river. So that's why the Russians requested civilians to leave this area, and I believe that the Russians will try to create some fortifications, very powerful fortification, because we understand that the Russians also can't leave this area, because if they leave this bank of the river, we can say goodbye to Nikolaev and Odessa, and the Russians won't be able to return on that bank of the river anymore in the future. Maybe they are able, but with have very heavy losses, so that's why they need to keep this area no matter what. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds that we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.